Namaste. Welcome to Vishwarang 2020 Tagore International Literature and Arts Festival. This is the Singapore chapter and the segment is Meet the Author. In this, we focus on various leading authors of Singapore. Let me first introduce you to a famous literary and academic figure of Singapore, Dr. Rajeev Patke. Dr. Patke is a professor of humanities at Yale and US College, and he has been professor of English at National University of Singapore. He has published several academic books on literature in English and is currently working on a project on kayak and Dhrupad form of classical music at Yale and US College. We invite Rajeev ji to introduce our author in focus and carry on the conversation. Thank you so much. Namaste, Rajeev ji. Welcome to the segment.
Thank you for the very kind welcome. And it's a pleasure to be part of Vishwaranga and to be introducing that part of the program which introduces Singaporean authors to the general public. So it's my great pleasure to introduce and welcome to this conversation a wonderful short story writer, poet, and novelist. She prefers the shorter form of her name, Latha. The fuller form of the name is K. Kanaglatha. She is currently Sunday editor of a Tamil periodical in Singapore and the author of 2 collections of poetry in Tamil. Her short story collection won the Singapore Literature Prize in 2008. And today I'm going to ask her a few questions about her more recent work, which is one of those wonderful novels which won an Epigram Book Prize in 2014. So with no further ado, let me invite Ms. Latha to join us in the conversation. Let me begin, Ms. Latha, by telling you how much I enjoyed, and I imagine a number of readers in Singapore enjoyed reading your short stories. And those of us who are able to read Tamil are also enormously impressed by your poetry. I look forward to translations of the poetry coming out in English from you or from interested bilingual speakers. Turning now to the novel or the collection of short stories with the title, The Goddess in the Living Room. These are wonderful short stories set in various parts of Singapore, one in the island off the coast of Singapore called Pulau Ubin, others in other parts of the Malaysian peninsula. So let me ask you first a simple question about your female characters. They are a wide variety, but the one thing that unites them all is that their lives are often oppressed either by social circumstance or by cultural conventions. So may I ask you to say something about the condition of women as you represent them in your novel?
Namaste, Rajeev, and I am thanking Vishwarang for giving me this chance. Yeah, you asked me a good questions. But I would say that several of the protagonists are not poor, and we can't generalize or quantify the percentage. In some stories, both being women and poor intersect with other. But it's not true for all the stories. The stories are not just about women, if I say, of a lower and middle socio-economic status, trying to ensure their existence. But they deal with what happens when social, racial, and economic disadvantage collide with one another.
Thank you. My second question will lead off from the first one. And indeed, I agree that you have a number of characters, everything from a young girl to a middle-aged woman, and you cover a wide range of age and family circumstance situations. So a larger question now, your characters and your stories are set largely in Singapore. The female characters derive in terms of their culture from India or from Tamil Nadu. Now, how far do you see a kind of fascinating interaction in your work between Indian culture and the social circumstances and realities of modern Singapore?
I would say that even though most of them are Singaporeans, yeah, in a way they are migrant. They came here before two centuries, maybe in 100 years back. In the story in identity, there is a new citizen. She struggled to settle in the Singapore community, and she find differences, even though she was educated and from a well-cultured family, and she finds she was marginalized, or I wouldn't say marginalized, she was discriminated against because she's being Indian and she's from India, and then the Singaporean living a life is very different. But to look at other stories, if it can be a journey or the battlefield, most of them are, they are Singaporeans, and they are grew up in the father and rain. All of them are the second, third generation Singapore. So they have formed their own identity themselves. If I say, basically, I am writing about Indian women in Singapore, a minority within minority, that would I would say. And I'm trying to explore how they are losing or destroying their own identity. In the process, I discover the different phases of them. You know, their women have a lot of different phases, and it varies. And because they have like inner phase, and then they have their own phase, but in the process of when getting together with the society, and they have to be in line with the society, or they have to be part of the society. So they somehow they are losing their identity. Or for look at the story in the identity, and the lady, she's come here, so she's trying to be a Singaporean, and she's trying all the way to be a Singaporean, but finally she feels that it's not possible because she can't she can't be there, that someone she's not, she know there. So I want to talk about their sensitivities and the responses to the varying situation in life in Singapore, and or being part of the minority. I felt I could honestly talk about it.
Well, indeed, the stories are very powerful. And when I started reading, I couldn't put the book down.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure whichever of your readers acquire a copy will have the same experience. Now, what fascinates one, regardless of whether one is Indian or not, or whether one is Singaporean with only a first, second, third generation or no connection with India, is that the condition of life that they lead, whether it is a domestic worker or a housewife or a young girl accompanying her grandfather to a fishing trip, the reality of their lives comes across very powerfully. Now, in that reality, it also becomes clear what we already know outside the world of fiction, that what a human being does, what one might call one's capacity for free action, is always determined by the social formation or structure we live in. Family, convention, tradition, expectations by mothers, fathers, grandparents, husbands, children on what a woman should do or how a woman should be. Now, in this, the question I have, which will concern women, but all readers in general, would be, how much scope do you see for women to have the opportunity to change their circumstances? Do they have to accept the social reality they live in? Or do you see your individual characters in the fictional world, but also in the real world, as having what we call agency, the freedom to move away or change a particular role that they find themselves in? What do you think?
Are you asking the in the Singapore context, or is it in a general context?
I think we should keep it to the Singapore context, because your novels, your stories give a very rooted sense of social
Yes.
reality in Singapore. So rather than discuss it like some European feminist
Yeah,
do
this
it
is
in
yeah.
Paris, or
Yeah.
someone else may do it in Japan, let's keep it, as it were, as the lived reality of what you are familiar with.
Yes. Yeah, we talk about families and society, and more than families and surroundings and community, other factors also, you know, the religion, race, social class, and a lot of other social factors play important role in shaping the life and experience or the freedom of women or their thought of women. That's I try to explore in these stories, and especially look at a few stories like Battlefield and Father and the Rain. You could see the difference how they evolve. You know, the daughter with the father who is very poor, and her mother has run away, and she has very difficult situations, and she changes, and she has a betterment of life. For that, I would say Singapore has helped, and Singapore has done very well in many aspects. I would say, especially in equalizing the educational outcomes, starting salaries and labor force, and participation rates in young male and female citizens. It helped them. You can see in my stories also. And also, the work contributes to the women's health and well-being, including a sense of dignity, pride, and self-worth. If it says Singapore, all of them work. Whatever work they do, there is no differences in work, because in Singapore they don't see where you are. I would say for a certain extent there is not this class of you are working in a higher bank, or you're working in a coffee shop, or you're working having a fishmonger. They don't see the differences. To my level, they see like most of them are equal. When they grew up in a secondary school, they still be friends. I could see that those who are working in a top banker or top corporate world, and she can visit and eat with a food stall owner. And food stall owner can own a Mercedes Benz in Singapore, and the fruit seller or fishmonger can be a bungalow houses. So that's here the economy play a very big role. But at the same time, I would say that after age of 30, women labor force participation rates fall continuously. You can see all the statistics without raising in their late 30s and 40s. But as in the first world countries, we compare with Sweden or any other first world countries, where many women return to paid employment after raising children. They are still, their family commitments are with the women. They have to look after their children, they look after their parents, in-laws, grandparents. Even though in Singapore, compared to other first world countries, the housemates or helper play a big role, and it's quite easy to get a helper when compared America or Britain or Australia or Japan. But they can, because it's quite in a way comparatively it's a bit cheaper, and they can get from their same country or decent helper, but yet the responsibility lie with them. And furthermore, I would say in almost every occupational and professional sphere, women are underrepresented in leadership ranks, and not only relative to their overall numbers and qualifications, but also compared with first world and even some third world countries. And I don't think so. We are going to have a women prime ministers anytime soon, like we have in India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan. You can see all the countries surrounding the head, but in Singapore, I don't think so. Even a deputy prime minister or a foreign minister, we can't think of it. It's quite a long way to go. So I feel this emotional, partially traditional values to a familiar and societal form, gender equality has taken longer in Singapore than other world. Perhaps because I would say they spend more focus on economic growth, outpace the social and cultural changes. And also, I feel in school and our social system is still the Asian values or the pre-industrial values of human. Even not only say Asian values. The women are the fundamental of the family, and they have the responsibility. I would say the responsibility is not shared equally in Singapore. Still, family responsibility and looking after children and bringing up their families all depends. It's in the hands of children. So sorry, it's in the hand of the women. So they are still not as free as is the world look at. But if say like in Singapore, women can travel anywhere in the night without fear. It's very safe, and they have the equal right to work, study, and there is no discrimination in a school or colleges. But this is ceiling is still there. Unsaid or unsettled rules is there. Is to become top in any positions or to be reached as equally as women, their male partners or their male colleagues. But still, like when they have, they go for the maternity leave, they struggle to come back to work, and they have children, they need to take time off, they are discriminated. Even being women is from normal work, from being just a helper in the shop to the very corporate offices. They are still discriminated, and we have a long way to go. That's what I feel.
Yeah, thank you. So indeed, as you say, there is a certain amount of freedom and a certain set of opportunities that women in Singapore do have, but there's a long way to go. We may have a president who is a woman, but not
Yes.
yet a prime minister or any other
Yeah.
senior minister. But yes,
That itself is a very big thing to have a president, after so long. It's a very big debate and things and all. And because for the Malay, and we could find a candidate. And yeah, she did very well. And she will, Halima Yaqub also have said, how much she has to struggle. And she still look after her children, the responsibilities with her.
right.
Yeah.
Well, indeed. So, turning to your stories, it is indeed the case that it is not just social issues that come across, but the human lived dimension of an individual in terms of how an individual might feel about a father or a husband or a child or a grandparent. So, your writing is deeply committed to what we might call in literary terms realism, that you want your fictional world to correlate with the world of social reality outside. Now, this is, of course, the standard way that many short stories, novels are written. But there is also a trend these days, and has been around for some time. In Latin American stories, it is called magic realism. In other places, it is given other names or labels, such as fantasy or surreal fiction or experimental fiction. I thought in an interview which tries in a quick way to give a comprehensive sense of you as a writer, I might ask one or two of these questions. So this is my anti-penultimate, not yet final, but almost final question. What is your attitude to writing that is not realist in orientation? Experimental writing, surreal writing, or fantasy?
Of course, I like that kind of writings, and I feel it's explore more, and it's make you think more, and it really giving work to your mind. Look at my story, Better Feel. It's not really a realistic story. I would say it's a bit of magical realism. Through the firewalking ceremony, I'm trying to talk about the life in Singaporean women, how life has been changed or destroyed. Oh, it's a kind of battlefield, It's in the she walks in a fireworking ceremony, and I described about the fireworking ceremony, but actually I described about her life. And these are my earliest stories I written in from 90s to 2000. But my some of the stories I have written in a very different way. But you need to have a different mindset and different technique to write all these kind of stories. But uh, it can be any way of writing, and it can be any genre, or it can be. But for me, whatever we write, it should have some level. It should give you some kind of darshan, I would say, when you're writing a story, novel fictions, and through the story. If not, I don't see reading any fictions or poetry. It should take you through a journey, life journey. That's what I feel. That thing you know about something, but you need to understand it more, and that teacher should take you in the journey and give you some kind of relations. It's for me, the literature can be the prayer, being in the literature, reading it, keeping the meditation. Yeah, so that's what I feel. Literature should take you. It can be written in, as we say, in fantasy or magic realism or the postmodernism. There are a lot of ways of expressing yourself. All these are technique. It's not matter for me. For me, the matter is the subject, or not even the subject. How the author or the poet or the presenter is debating with you, putting you through the sense of life to you, and the thing teach you is in a way. When we read Mahabharatam, it's a normal story when you get difference. When we read different versions and different interpretations, we learn more. We understand a lot of things. J. Morgan, the greatest writer in Tamil, he has written Mahabharata in anyway more than 300 over 1,000 words. He wrote it for 5-6 years. So he interpreted very differently, in a way that, Draupadi, the stories in the thing they're trying to take away their sorry, and he interpreted in a way how all these Vishwarang's wives, 100 wives are right, but what would have they felt? What would have talked to their husbands? You know.
Yes.
So yeah, yes. So
Indeed, yes. So the story called Kavdi has that element of the surreal where the firewalking practice, which is a very
yes.
unnerving ritual for those not familiar with it. Okay, thank you. So let us move now to what will be my last but one question.
Mm-hmm.
The question is an obvious one that any reader who admires an author would like to know from the author. Who are your role models, if any? Who are the poets or novelists or short story writers that you have admired the most? And you see, I ask this question because whenever one meets an author, there's a special appeal to know what an author likes and admires the most about other writers. Because then I, as a reader, would say, oh, okay, if it is author X or author Y, I would love to read the person's books because you have told me that you admire that author the most. So do tell us who your favorite authors are.
It changes, when I started reading, I read most in Tamil, then I started reading English. When I started reading, I read all those. When I read Enid Blyton, I felt like it's like I have to be someone like her, write things, and then I come to this. Slowly, I changed to read all these popular fiction. So, but slowly I moved in. I start to read. I heard about Jayakandan and the Pudme Pittan. They are the one really. Still, people read them, and still it's inspire me and teach me about life. And now after that, I feel my role model has become Dev Mohan. He not only talking about stories or fiction, he talks about a lot of other things. He says that story is not just stories. You have to have talk about philosophy. You have to talk about science. You have to have a lot of other things to know write a story, and it teach you how you have to be um, well read, and you have to be you have to be wiser to write a story.
Thank you. Well, let's turn now to our final question for you, which is more like a invitation. If you were meeting a bunch of young writers, young boys and girls in school, junior college, who have an interest in writing, in Tamil, in Hindi, in English, in Chinese, whatever language, what would be your message to young people? What is the importance of them keeping to writing in the complex world we live in, which gets even more complicated as we go along?
My first advice, or first my share my experience, to tell them to read more. Read, like selectively read the best article. Don't read everything from social media. Everything selectively read good things. Read from Shakespeare to Bernard Shaw, to whoever you find interesting. Read. Second thing is post it. Whatever you write, post it, share it, and debate it. Most important thing nowadays, I find young people are not, especially in Singapore, not ready to take criticism. They do not want to hear anything bad or anything like critiques them. They just need immediate success. Whatever they write, they feel they should, like, somebody should mark them, or somebody should like agree them, or they should be in the stage. It's not the way. Many of you from a lot of things, you see, they have tried very hard to be the popular or the best writer. So take your time, and allow to be criticized, and learn from all the critics that you can see.
Thank you very much. So we end this interview with me once again reminding all readers that if they have not already done so, they should acquire a copy of Ms. Latha's book of short stories. It is very accessible, it's very enjoyable. The title is The Goddess in the Living Room, and it was published in 2014 by Epigram Books in Singapore. So with that, we come to the end of this interview. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rajeev ji and Lata ji, for a wonderful conversation. It has made me aware of a lot of socio-political as well as personal landscape and the feelings that Lata ji goes through. And also, Rajeev ji, you have really, in a very short time, managed to bring so much of the author in front of the listeners and the viewers. So thank you, viewers, for joining us for this segment. Thank you so much.